I think tariffs are the most beautiful word. I think they're beautiful. It's going to make us rich. The protective tariff policy of the Republicans has been made and made the lives of our countrymen sweeter and brighter.
There'll be jobs in every part of the country. Red states, blue states, cities, small towns, rural communities, tribal communities.
It would have an adverse impact on the competitiveness of some sectors of the United States economy and could significantly raise costs to households.
It's going to be a big problem for Americans as well, but we will use every tool in our toolbox to fight back.
We're doing a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum.
Sehr klar das Gespräch suchen und die Meinung, die ich in dieser Frage habe, ist sehr, sehr eindeutig. Wir halten nichts von Protektionismus. Wir glauben, dass die Welt ein besserer Ort ist mit mehr Wohlstand, wenn es fairen, freien Handel geben kann.
And I think people south of the border are beginning to wake up to the reality that tariffs on everything from Canada would make life a lot more expensive for Americans.
Entonces, es un impuesto que afecta primordialmente a este complejo industrial y tecnológico cuyos principales exponentes son estos tres grandes grupos de los propios Estados Unidos.
American politicians love tariffs. They treat it as a magic elixir that solves all their problems. But in reality, it is a poisoned chalice that destroys the very economy they claim to protect. The University of Chicago conducted a survey in September 2024, asking a group of renowned economists if imposing tariffs results in a substantial portion of the tariffs being borne by the consumers of the country that enacts the tariffs through price increases. Only 2% disagreed.
Importers pay the tariffs, but the people who actually bear the costs of the tariffs are usually the consumers, those buying the goods subject to the tariffs, whether they are individual consumers or companies purchasing components or resources for their production. Those are the ones that bear the higher cost, and those costs affect their ability to make a profit and stay in business.
The American people are well aware of the inevitable price increases to come. They have already begun stockpiling the goods they need.
Tariffs would impact a wide variety of products, including many everyday items that you might use. Here is a breakdown by category to help you better understand. Electronics, such as gaming laptops, prices could increase by up to 45%. If you're thinking of buying one soon, it could go from $1,000 to $1,450. Gaming consoles, expect a 40% price increase as many of the consoles are made in China. Monitors, prices could rise by about 31%. Clothing and textiles are included too. Clothes and shoes. Many clothing brands import from overseas, and these tariffs could cause prices to go up by 10% to 25%. Jeans, t-shirts, and sneakers, popular items in everyday clothing, could get more expensive. Household goods like furniture that is imported could see a price hike of up to 20%. Appliances, so items like refrigerators, washing machines, and microwaves, may also rise in price due to higher tariffs on metals and electronic components.
Everything is going to be more expensive. Not much is made in the US. We do import a lot of things, and even those items that are made here, the materials that they use to make the products are still imported. So realistically, any type of tariff is going to affect basically everything.
Literally, there are zero things that are completely made in the United States without some sort of raw material or manufacturing or purchasing some sort of import from another country.
This is how tariffs work. Average Americans have to pay for them. Take shoes, for example. According to Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America, 99% of all shoes sold in the U.S. are imported. China accounts for over 60% of all imports. In 2018, tariffs were imposed. That means that in 2023, Americans paid an extra $9.3 billion for shoes. $9.3 billion just for shoes. What if there are tariffs on everything?
The only thing they do is bring down the standard of living in the United States, and there are a variety of other negative aspects in addition to bringing down the standard of living. And you get a lot more corruption because you get the politicians involved in setting the tariffs and the trade restrictions and protectionism, and people don't like that, and so what do? You hire a lobbyist to try to become exempt from the tariff. The exemptions, the tariffs were increased, but the exemptions for various groups went up tremendously. And why were the exemptions made? Because lobbyists were paying off politicians to vote for exemptions. So it fuels a lot of corruption.
In 2018, more than 1,100 economists signed an open letter to Congress opposing the move, warning of price hikes and a decrease in U.S. exports. But the warnings didn't stop the tariff raise, just like it failed to do nearly a century ago. The Tariff Act of Smoot-Hawley of 1930, under the Hoover administration, raised U.S. tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods during the Great Depression. U.S. exports and imports both plummeted by over 50%.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
Senator Smoot and Representative Hawley thought tariff hikes were the solution to foster domestic absorption to overproduction as a result of technological advancement. They thought they could help beleaguered farmers. They were wrong.
Now, the tariff came in 1930, the Smoot-Hawley tariff, and of course that reduced tremendously imports coming into the United States. They were reduced by about 70%. So world trade just started shrinking. You had one of the big economies in the world going into depression. Then the tariff came on, and that restricted imports coming into the United States. And other countries reacted by putting in tariffs of their own. And so that stopped exports going out from the United States and other countries. So the tariff was, I would say, the icing on the cake that really pushed things even lower in the Great Depression than would have been the case just due to the collapse in the money supply.
The Smoot-Hawley tariffs have a bad reputation, and for good reason. The higher tariffs reduced demand in the U.S. economy. They generated uncertainty that dampened investment in the U.S. economy, and thus undercut economic growth. The purpose was to hurt our trading partners, beggar thy neighbors, but beggar thy neighbor policies inevitably hurt the instigators as well as the target country. And so what we have found is that soon after the Great Depression, and to move out of the Great Depression, the United States promulgated the Reciprocal Tariff Act of 1934, which started a process of negotiating tariff reductions to wind down the damage done by the Smoot-Hawley tariffs.
It is ironic that the United States has repeatedly turned to tariffs as an economic tool. American politicians might have forgotten that it once proved to be a catalyst that propelled America down the road to revolution. On December 16, 1773, 342 chests of tea on board 3 merchant ships of the British East India Company were thrown into the sea by the Sons of Liberty. It was a protest against the British government's tea taxation, which forced America, then a colony of Britain, to to pay import taxes on the tea they never agreed to. The colonists viewed them as unjust. The harsh response from the British government inflamed the resistance, setting the stage for the American Revolutionary War.
Then the tariff abominations came in 1828. It was a very complicated mess and was a north-south split because the protectionists that wanted high tariffs were in the north, and the southerners wanted free trade. They were mainly trading agricultural products, cotton and other agricultural products. So they wanted free trade. And the dividing line was really rather remarkable between the South voting against the tariffs and the North voting for. And tariffs, by the way, in 1830, 2 years after the tariff of abominations came in, they reached a peak of 62%. So they were very high tariffs. And the kind of headline feature of the Civil War was slavery, but actually it was economic, and it was set up, as you can see, about 30 years before the Civil War actually started.
It was some decades later that the new country then launched its own tariffs. The young independent America thought protectionism was the way to protect local industries. It began with the Tariff of 1816, aimed at protecting local factories and generating federal revenue. Then the U.S. Tariff of 1828, known as the Tariff of Abominations, imposed a 38% tax on some imported goods and a 45% tax on certain imported raw materials. The tariff was greatly opposed by the southern states, as it made imports more costly and also made it difficult for Europeans to pay for American exports. It fueled the divide between the industrial North and the agrarian South, a division which would eventually lead to Americans turning on each other. With lessons drawn from blood, U.S. policymakers began to recognize that protectionism did nothing but harm. They realized that free trade offered a better path to facilitate recovery by opening markets and promoting economic growth.
Advocates of protectionism often ignore its huge hidden costs that far outweigh any temporary benefits.
We have benefited for 60 years by leading the way to integrate the world's economies, and that will promote peace, it will promote freedom, it will promote stability, it will raise the level of living standards in other parts of the world, even as it maintains America as the world's most prosperous nation.
We are moving toward a great goal, a world that trades in freedom, in the Western Hemisphere, in Asia, and beyond. Bring lower prices to American consumers and to generate high-wage jobs for developing nations.
The shift in the United States from trade protectionism to supporting free trade was marked by the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade in 1947. Cordell Hull, the Secretary of State under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, believed that unhampered trade dovetailed with peace. High tariffs, trade barriers, and unfair economic competition with war. If we could get a freer flow of trade, freer in the sense of fewer discriminations and obstructions, so that one country would not be deadly jealous of another, and the living standards of all countries might rise, thereby eliminating the economic dissatisfaction that breeds war, we might have a reasonable chance of lasting peace. The principles and policies finally agreed upon laid the groundwork for what would become the multilateral trading system under the World Trade Organization in 1995. The WTO, as a multilateral trading platform, has made remarkable contributions to trade among its current 166 member economies.
And the benefits are tremendous that are associated with free trade. The gains from trade are about 2 to 8% of GDP in the United States. Now, what that amounts to, if you look at the households in the United States, that would be an increase in their income of about 5.5% to 21.7%. So depending on the studies you look at, there's a huge increase in household income that's solely the result of trade.
For decades, free trade reigned in the world, until recently.
My administration is committed to defending American companies, and they've been very badly hurt from harmful import surges that threaten the livelihood of their workers, of jobs actually all over this country.
And today we're getting to work to rebuild the backbone of America, manufacturing, unions, the middle class. It's based on a simple premise that will reward work, not wealth in this country. And the key plank of ensuring the future will be made in America.
The message here was clear. Bring jobs back to the U.S. But is it really that simple? Many U.S. manufacturers rely on imported components. Tariffs increase production costs, which by the simple laws of economics reduces competitiveness. The automotive industry contributes 3% to the overall U.S. GDP and is viewed as a critical sector of the United States. The industry relies on global supply chains for affordable and readily available parts. For example, the Ford F-150 is assembled in Michigan and Missouri, but only 45% of its parts are produced in factories in the U.S. or Canada. Several major U.S. automakers have extensive manufacturing operations overseas. High tariffs increase costs and force executives to adjust their investment plans. There were significant losses.
More permanent tariffs would likely have to be paired with more subsidies to keep the companies afloat. And that would prove costly and politically difficult to sustain as the budget deficit will impose pressures to reduce those subsidies. So I think tariffs should be seen as part of an adjustment process, but very time limited, 1, 2, 3 years, with the protection going down over time as required under the international trading rules.
The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has published multiple reports on the negative impacts of tariffs on U.S. businesses. They found that forcing businesses back to the U.S. could sometimes lead to higher costs due to labor and infrastructure challenges, a primary reason why companies prefer cheaper alternatives overseas. The Council on Foreign Relations has examined the global shift in manufacturing costs and has reported that Vietnam has become a rising key competitor in the manufacturing sector, attracting U.S. businesses for its low labor costs. So again, the tariffs achieved the opposite. Politicians thought they could attract business back home, but they instead created so many obstacles that eventually made manufacturing in the U.S. more difficult, less attractive. Simply put, they failed again.
They're bad for the tech companies. They will slow innovation. Trade is the best thing for innovation because you're trading. and by the way, if you're trading, it has to benefit both sides because the seller wouldn't sell you something at a given price and you wouldn't buy it at a given price if you, the buyer, weren't benefiting, and the seller wouldn't sell it to you if he wasn't benefiting. So contrary to what most people think, trade is not a zero-sum game that just nets out to zero. It's a positive-sum game. The seller gains and the buyer gains. So, and innovation and technology gain.
As Americans look at it, it's a total failure. It didn't work before, and it won't work again. And this is, almost every economist will agree with what I'm about to say. To the extent that it brings back jobs, those goods that are produced in the United States will be produced by robots. That's not going to create the jobs that they want.
The Steel Manufacturers Association and American Automotive Policy Council both warned that steel and aluminum tariffs would increase costs for U.S. manufacturers, potentially leading to job losses in industries that rely on those imports. A report by the Federal Reserve Board concluded that the negative impacts of increased production costs and retaliatory tariffs far outweighed the limited benefits.
The number of jobs is going down in manufacturing, and that's because of productivity. Output per worker is going up with productivity increases. So those are the trends, and the tariffs are not going to budge those trends very much.
Now, U.S. politicians have come up with another argument for tariffs: national security. They argue that, if well targeted, tariffs can meet national security needs.
The national security rationale is pretty murky and has nothing really to do with economics. It's basically the politicians wrapping themselves in the flag and saying that this national security need is so urgent that we need a tariff.
The U.S. has imposed tariffs on steel, which they argue are important commodities for U.S. national defense, as ships, tanks, and aircraft all require the material. Some in Congress have adopted the view that a reliance on cheaper imported steel could be a potential threat to national security. But in reality, only 3% of U.S. steel shipments go to servicing U.S. defense. Also, most imports come from U.S. traditional allies.
President Biden has put a ban or a total restriction on Nippon Steel from Japan buying U.S. steel. That's a bad deal. That's a bad policy. It's a bad policy, number one, for U.S. steel, because if Nippon would have bought it, they would have recapitalized U.S. steel, modernized it, and it would have been good for American workers. So this is a perfect case. Biden said he was going to block this takeover of U.S. steel by Nippon, the Japanese steel maker, for national security reasons. But that doesn't make much sense. I thought Japan was an ally of the United States. So what's going on here? That's why I say any of these national security arguments get very murky and they're very hard to follow because they have no economic logic at all. It's a bad deal economically because it's going to be bad for U.S. steel. They won't have the capital to modernize their operations, and it's bad for the American workers that are working for U.S. steel, and it's obviously bad for the stockholders of U.S. steel. So it's just bad all the way around. But again, that's what you get into when you get into national security arguments.
American politicians seem to have forgotten the harsh lessons of the past, or perhaps they never learned them in the first place. Free trade unleashes the advantages of each nation, allowing countries to specialize in producing goods and services they can make better and more efficiently, while importing those they produce less efficiently. In contrast, protectionist policies disrupt this dynamic. They do little but delay the benefits of progress and stifle the shared prosperity that free trade fosters.
These tariffs are not a solution. They can be a defensive reaction for a certain sector, for a certain domain, or because there's no fair level playing field. But in the long run, we are all in need of free global trade.
One fact is true. Tariffs will raise money for the government, and with more money in the federal coffer, politicians could continue to buy support to promote their tariff schemes that don't work, instead of using better ways like employing free trade to lower costs and bring jobs back to America. But this would be admitting they were wrong all along. Sadly, like many times before, they might not realize it until it's too late.